Ladies and gentlemen, please silence your phones and hush your babies. The show is about to start. Hi everyone, Nemo here. Welcome. I almost said welcome to the Nemo & Co. Conference Halftime Show, but it's not that. You've got 6 months to go until you have to deal with me and that all over again. So welcome to a live stream though, and it's very exciting to have you all here on a live stream. We're going to talk about Kyle S. McKay. But before we talk about him, I just want to talk about some of the rumors that have been flying around on ex-Mormon Reddit and in the Facebook groups and all these sorts of things about a new policy of exclusion that seems to be coming out with the church. They're calling it Policy of Exclusion 2.0. And reports we're hearing from Reddit are that a girl that was due to be baptized, who was socially transitioned, is now no longer being baptized because something's holding it up. We don't know any more details than that, really. And from our inside sources here in the UK, nothing has been sent out to state presidents, bishops, etc. So there's been no formal communication of that kind. So everyone keep an eye on the handbook, keep an eye on your local leaders, keep asking them about it. And if we keep talking about it enough, we can, keep it in the zeitgeist and monitor it. So with all that said, let's go on to the truly problematic thing of Kyle S. McKay. Kyle S. McKay. And to talk about it, I've brought in some lovely guests. So, hey everyone.
Hello.
How are you all doing?
Hello.
Good?
Well, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we've got lovely on the bottom row, Jane from 21st Century Saints and Ruth Heath from 21st Century Saints. We've got Peter, always ready to come and give his opinion. And he's from the Mormon Civil War podcast. And am I right in thinking you're going to do a deep dive on this talk, Peter?
Yeah, it's I deep dive everything, so it's going to be part of my next episode series. Yeah, so I've been having a good look at it as well.
Okay, which it always worries me a little bit whenever Peter says that, this is going to be part of my next episode, because you know that it's then just added to his next episode, which means it's going to take longer for it to come out. But the Mormon Church just doesn't stop doing silly
I know,
things.
It's a nightmare.
So and then like, every time they do
I've
something,
got to include that.
Exactly. So Pete, you thought you had your last episode tied up, and then all of a sudden Ahmed Corbett comes out with something against activism, and all of a sudden you've got to go on to that. So yeah,
it's a nightmare.
And this was another one of those. So on the 25th of April, we heard from our church historian. Well, say historian. He's a lawyer. Should we learn a bit about him? Okay.
Was sustained as a General Authority 70 on March 31st, 2018. At the time of his call, he had been serving as a member of the 5th Quorum of the 70 in the Utah North area. He is the church historian and recorder and executive director of the Church History Department. He also serves on the Scripture Committee. Elder McKay received a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from Brigham Young University in 1984. In 1987, he received a Juris Doctor degree from Brigham Young University. From 1987 to 2018, Elder McKay practiced law in Oregon and Utah. Elder McKay has served in a number of church callings, including full-time missionary in the Japan Kobe Mission, Elders Quorum President, Ward Young Men President, High Counselor, Counselor in a Stake Presidency, and a Stake President. Kyle Sterling McKay was born in Chicago, Illinois on February 14th, 1960. He married Jennifer Stone in 1984. They are the parents of 9 children.
Yeah, the parents of 9 children, church broke, and a lawyer. Why would you have your church historian be a lawyer, Jane?
Yeah, do you remember when Lindsay Hansen Park first started taking a deep dive into Mormon polygamy, and the apologists were telling her very vocally she had no qualifications, no right to be working in this space, because of course she's not a fully trained lawyer. So yeah.
Well, they went after the Tanners for the same, didn't they? They went after Sandra and Gerald and said, you're not qualified, you're not historians. But, yeah, they should have just been lawyers, and then they would have been fine. And I put that intro at 2 times speed because Henry B. Eyring's son, who's president of BYU-Idaho, a little bit of nepotism there, speaks so slowly, just like his dad. So, yeah, we need to keep that. We need to get the life. I'm being told in the chats he was a companion of RFM. Is this true?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah,
he's
one of RFM's companions. Right.
So
okay.
RFM said he's a decent chap, but he's massively unimpressed with what he's saying now. So,
well, I mean, as you would be,
RFM
right?
does little TikToks every so often now. Yeah.
He does. Yeah, you should go check out his TikTok. RFM's TikToks are excellent.
And
so,
he
Ruth
is
Yes.
sorry, and he's related to President David O. McKay. So
Oh,
that's
is he?
the McKay connection. I think
Okay.
his grandfather.
I'd rather
is dead
point
and
out
his
that
cousin
that
was
means
something.
he's related to Fawn Brodie. If,
Yes, that's
if
true.
He's related to
There's a better
David
connection.
McKay. I think that's probably a better claim to fame as a historian than his English degree.
Hell yeah.
Right. So I'm just going to get his first clip loaded up here, and let's get right to it.
Is your testimony of Jesus Christ and his restored gospel strengthened by but not dependent on others? Is your foundation sure and certain enough that you can remain unshaken even if someone you admire in the faith makes a mistake now or in the future or in the past? Is your knowledge and testimony of truth strong enough that you can stare down compelling reasons to doubt and choose to believe?
Okay, well, that's problematic. Because if it's compelling, surely you should investigate it, right? If it's a compelling reason to doubt, then you should follow that compulsion and investigate it and then determine whether it is something that you need to act on or not. Just choosing to believe is like finding out say you're going in for surgery, right? This is what I want to talk about and get your thoughts on. Say you're going for surgery. You have faith that your doctor is a qualified surgeon. You have faith that he is going to do his best to look after you. You have faith in all these things, and you have no compelling reasons to doubt. If you find out that last night he was on the lash, for our American viewers, that means he was out getting drunk, and that he wasn't necessarily qualified, and there was some other things that needed investigating, choosing to believe or choosing to have faith in him anyway is not a virtue, it's just willful ignorance. So if there's compelling reasons to doubt his qualifications, you shouldn't let him operate on you. But what Kyle S. McKay is asking us to do is choose, in spite of compelling reasons, to just believe anyway. And that's not a virtue in my book. What are your thoughts?
I think to extend that analogy, and that's a really good analogy, he then goes on to say, don't let somebody having made a mistake today or in the past put you off trusting them. And to extend that analogy of the surgeon with the scalpel hovering over you and you being handed information that last week, last year, there's this many deaths of sepsis on his table. There's this many deaths because he cut off the wrong limb because he was too drunk to know the difference. I think that would give me reason to pause. I don't think I should just blindly now trust the guy because he seems like a nice guy.
Or he claims to be an amazing surgeon.
Claims to be an amazing surgeon, and I find out now he's got an English degree rather than a clinical surgeon training. That might give me reason to pause. And it's not about mistakes, are not about the person. And this is where he's done a bit of a bait and switch, because when it comes to church history, it's not about the person, the human vehicle of that information that we have a problem with. It's about the inaccuracy of the historical information that we've been told. We allow people to be human and have human frailties. We expect that. In fact, we demand that, because anyone who says they are perfect, I would have a huge issue with. But when they tell me that the information, that I must trust every information that they give me, and then I find out that they have lied about that information, that I'm going to have a problem with. And it's not about them as a person, it's about with the facts.
Jane, your thoughts?
I feel kind of mixed about it, because I am remembering the person that I was when I would have happily delegated that comfort, to leaders that I can trust. I feel that it was, I did always feel it was important to have context and nuance in prophets. That's where I found it exciting. But to constantly be reminding us that the main problem is that we're looking for faults among people. And no one is doing that. No one in this space is doing that. So where I find what he's saying super helpful, what he says at the beginning about the foundational stuff,
Mm-hmm.
brilliant. Talk to me in depth, in concrete detail about that without getting off into these weeds about things that aren't even, this is not where my mind is going. When my husband and I, we were separated, what would it have been 18 years ago now, I'm coming back to church activity, and I'm going to be returning to our marriage, which I wouldn't yet know. As I return to church activity, I know that the things that are going to keep me in church statistically are not going to work because you all leave. So what are some of the things that I need to do? And it's those foundational things. Your answers might not work for me. So yeah, putting in the hard work, not being a lazy learner, shall we hijack that phrase? We are here because we put the bloody work in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the same way, and I do think the surgeon analogy is a much more accurate one, I do think there is another analogy that is helpful to me in this space, which is perhaps one of a marriage. Were there to be 1,000,001 reasons for my husband and I to choose not to return to a marriage, if we're just using the head part of our minds, it's probably statistically not going to work, and all of those things. So what is of most value? Is the person that you're in this relationship with lying to me? Are they going to be a serial adulterer? Those are all relevant things.
Mm-hmm.
But are there some things that we can allow that imperfection and be in a relationship? So those are the types of questions I was asking myself back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's value. However, the stakes for this are so high. This
Mm-hmm.
is about more than just a marriage. This is a relationship where, yeah, lives have been at stake with this. People have been seriously harmed.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I think it's really interesting that, you look at the church and you say that, well, okay, they may be imperfect. And what Kyle S. McKay does during all of this is he essentially creates big false binaries and big extremes where he says, right, if there's errors, people are saying that means they shouldn't be prophets. No, that's not what we're saying. He'll go on to say that later, and we'll talk about it in more detail later. But the actual problem is that they're lying when they're claiming to speak for God. That's a problem. It's like, should you expect imperfections from your spouse, to go down the spouse analogy? Yes. But if they're gaslighting you, lying to you, abusing you, and then the solution is, well, just choose to stay with them. Again, it's that in spite of all the evidence, you trust your spouse is a good person, but if they keep giving you reasons, because, you get married after 3, 4, 5, 6 years even, you still don't necessarily know that person fully, but you trust that they're a good person, you get married to them, and that trust continues until they give you a reason to think otherwise. And the answer then is not to persevere in spite of the reasons they've given you to the contrary, particularly if they're severe. If they don't put the toilet seat down, should you leave them? No, right? But again, it depends how long you end up married for. But do you see what I'm saying? Am I making sense, or am I rambling?
Yeah. No, I think you are, because
Okay.
it's like Ruth is talking about. We're talking the surgery for women. I think the marriage analogy is helpful, often because there are sometimes power dynamics that we're relearning how to interact with people and unlearning things that were unhealthy ways of thinking. The problem is with the surgeon analogy, there is a power dynamic. The surgeon is God. The surgeon is the only person who has any control of decision making, and he decides what's safe and what's correct. And so we're asking ourselves, are we in an abusive relationship with the church where no, we don't ask questions? Some of those first questions that I would be asking if I'm concerned about a toxic relationship would be, are you being allowed to see your friends? Are you being discouraged from connecting with others on the internet? Do you have financial control? All of those things that are massive warning signs. So do you override that, or are we just simply looking at the value of a human being? And in neither case are we being reductive. So to do that at this most critical time is grossly unfair.
And I think, I've not given Peter a chance to speak yet, but
it's all right. He'll get his moment.
he will do. I think as well, a really great way to know if it's a healthy relationship, whether we're talking doctors, whether we're talking religious leaders, whether we're talking a marriage, is if somebody can own their mistakes. Then you know it was a genuine mistake and they want to do better next time. So if somebody forgot your birthday and they said, I'm so sorry, it was your birthday last week, wasn't it? Let's go out for a meal, let's do something special. I'm writing it in my diary now for next year. That's somebody who's saying, I've made a mistake. I acknowledge that I probably have hurt you, by overlooking this. And I'm going to take these steps to make sure we don't have that happen again. That's somebody who's admitting to a mistake and to a human frailty. I don't see that being modelled by the church leaders. If they want to admit to the mistakes that they have made in the operation of this corporation, if they want to admit to their mistakes in their historical narratives, if they want to admit to their mistakes in the way that they have mistreated people, I'm here listening. I will listen to that, and I'll be really, really keen to hear that explanation as to why they've come to the point that they are and what they're going to do in the future to improve things for people.
Yeah, just before I bring you in, Peter, I want to talk about my time as a clinician. Before I started doing this full time, I made clinical mistakes, and the first thing I would do is, well, if you're honest with yourself, the first thing you want to do is minimize those mistakes and actually not tell anyone, because it's embarrassing, or it can be seen as a perceived threat to your sense of your sense of worth, your perceived abilities, your skills. I shouldn't make that kind of mistake. I thought I was better than this, all those sorts of things. But the right thing to do, and what I always did, was you then report it. We have reporting systems within the NHS. So, okay, what happened? What could be done to prevent it in future? Does your manager know? All these sorts of things. And that would be that is the healthiest way to learn from mistakes. And we'll talk about it again later. But this idea that you should never study errors is just bonkers. Errors are what we should spend a lot of our time studying, because it's how we learn and do better next time. Peter, your thoughts, and then we'll move on.
Yeah. And I have control.
I forgot you had
So,
this
Matt
kind of power. Can we take this away from him? Go on.
So Matt Allen said, can the church or leadership tell me what the compelling reasons to doubt are and let me make the decision? And it feels like this is a surrender, that they've just kind of basically surrendered even trying to answer the questions anymore. And I don't think I think the reason, in a way, it was inevitable they get here, because the first presidency are absolutely stubborn that they will never apologize for anything. Dallin Oaks has said that. So when you take that off the table, and we're still hearing general authorities saying to us that if all the apostles agree on something, then it is infallible. It is the mind will of God. I mean, there's lots more that he's going to say a bit later that kind of touches on these things. You can't then have this guy coming along, as he does later, saying, oh, well, obviously they're all human and fallible, of course. Why would you expect any different? But they will never admit what the mistakes are. And he backtracks on it later, and he says, I'm not saying there are valid reasons to doubt. He can't, none of them at any point. And I was trying to think, have I heard any general authority actually say what the mistakes are and admit them? And the only person who's come close to that is Dieter Uchtdorf, who's been removed from the first presidency for it, and he kept it vague. But there may have been mistakes made that can challenge people's testimonies. Our leaders haven't always represented our values, which is a massive understatement for murder, child abuse, theft, lying on an epic scale, all of this good stuff. And Jacob Schramm also has said that this is the single biggest issue. This is the single biggest issue I have with the church right now. The only Christ-like attribute that matters is blind trust and obedience, even when there are very good reasons not to trust someone. So this is what this is boiling down to, isn't it? They've given up trying. And I'm trying to work out, does it mean the institutional church has stopped trying? A couple of months ago, Keith Erickson, who Kyle now line manages, who is the director of historical outreach. He's meant to be the interface, basically doing the apologetics. He came to Crawley Stake, and we went along and listened to him doing his thing. So he is still trying to give people answers interestingly, he was much less honest this time. He clearly worked out some distraction answers to give and was not being as honest as he was during the British Rescue when we were engaging with him directly. But is it just the fact that they keep appointing lawyers as the church historians?
I'd
The
say
best
so.
justification I heard from the best justification I heard from that was from either Snow or Jensen, who are two of the recent ones, saying, I think in an interview with Mormon Land, my role is actually diplomatic. I'm representing the historians to the general authorities, and a lot of his work was kind of protecting the historians and letting them do their thing and persuading the general authorities to authorize that. So that's a small positive, having allegedly those kinds of skills. But the problem here, as we're seeing clearly from everything this guy says, is he doesn't know church history. He doesn't know even basic stuff.
Well,
he
that's a really good
description of the first vision.
That's a really good
It's
segue
incredible.
for us, Peter. Let's add this guy to the stream.
Young Canadian convert
And
was John Taylor.
The young Canadian convert was John Taylor. Now, maybe technically correct, he was converted in Canada, but he is British. John Taylor was born in Britain and didn't leave until he was 24 years old. He grew to adulthood in Britain. So, that's just a small minor fact that irks.
Yeah. Are you going to play the context of that quote?
No.
The whole thing. Yeah. So basically, what he's saying there is there was a period in 1837 when Parley P. Pratt lost his testimony of Joseph Smith, and it was during the financial shenanigans in Kirtland. Joseph had
Peter, before you go into it, we're going to move on just because there's a reason I didn't clip it out and put it in the show, because I wasn't going to go into it.
Yeah, that's fine. Because
I want to go to where he actually touches on some of the reasons to doubt, because I think this is as close as we've ever gotten. I think is when he actually starts to talk about some of the valid reasons that there are to doubt. So let's open this one up.
Is your testimony of Jesus Christ?
That is the wrong one. So talk amongst yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see if I can find the right one this time.
Anyway, back to my story.
Yeah, can I give a little bit?
Yeah. Go on. Jane,
can I give a little bit of context for what I feel like is happening here? Because when you were speaking, Peter, it was highlighting what some of these questions are. They're not small things like my visiting teachers don't come enough, or my bishop isn't meeting with me regularly, or whatever it is. These are big questions. And today I'm having this experience, which is summing up what happened there, and it's this wonderful guy in church, and he's repurposing an old Buddhist parable, which we're now applying to Mormonism, where the bishop or the teacher is saying, if you focus on the glass of water, if you take this glass of water round and try not to spill it, it doesn't spill because that's where the focus is. The problem is, over the history of the church, there are issues where people have said the building is on fire, and to focus on a glass of water or a spoon of water, however we're repurposing it, these are huge problems. We're talking about things that are massive, that have, people have lost their lives over things, that we are wrestling with. These questions are big. And so to minimize them by suggesting, we're making it about fault finding, really, how dare you do that? How dare you?
Yeah. Right. I found the clip. Thank you very much, though, Jane. Thank you.
As you increase your efforts to increase your testimony, you are likely to become confronted with reasons to doubt. President Nelson cautioned, quote, "Don't pollute your testimony with false philosophies of unbelieving men and women," close quote. Please hear me and understand. There will always be some reason or another to doubt the truthfulness of this church and gospel. There are arguments and evidence supporting the proposition that there is no God, that Jesus was just a good philosopher teacher, that Joseph Smith was simply a charismatic storyteller, and that this church and gospel are not true. This evidence, these arguments, are on some level appealing and believable, for there are many who believe them.
Yeah. I think that's about as close as someone's ever come to actually describing over the pulpit the problems.
And I think he hid the most important
but they're not the
one.
problems.
I think he hid the most important one in a list there, because that there is no God, that Christ was just, a charismatic leader, philosopher. Then we get that about Joseph Smith. That's where the problem lies, because there are Christians worldwide who can find a way to draw close to Jesus Christ, who find value in the stories of Jesus Christ. And there are people of other religions who also find value in the stories of Jesus Christ. So that's actually a non-issue, those first couple of points. The point that he then sort of smeared past within his list was the one over Joseph Smith. And I think that's a massive one, because our foundational truths of this being the one and only true church with a prophet who speaks directly to God and whose power comes through that relationship with Joseph Smith is a massive, bold claim, and one that I found very compelling when I joined the church as a 14-year-old, but one which is slipping through their fingers fast when the actual historical truths of the church and its foundations are coming to light. Mm-hmm. That's the part of it that he needs to wrestle with.
Jane?
Yeah, but I feel like what he's doing is so lawyerly, is so good. It's all, we saw this happen in the Book of Mormon time and time again. He carefully constructs an argument that begins with something that, most of us can get behind. There's always going to be a reason for you to doubt anything. There's always, back to the surgeon analogy, there's always going to be a reason for you to have worries and fears, and sometimes those fears are based on really tangible, real concerns. This is fine. He then, though, starts off with, the idea that, people who are, claiming that there is no God. Now, even that, no one claims that, right? Because if we're going down the scientific route, no one is making that claim, because that's not how it works. In fact, the exact opposite is happening. We're trying to make these claims, and then it's sort of built from there, where he kind of just takes it, flips it on its head, and we haven't really noticed that he's built an argument that's almost making it so that we can't criticize unhealthy behaviors in the person who founded the religion.
Mm-hmm. Peter?
I think it's so frustrating that the people he's speaking to are young adults in a university. I mean, we kind of understand that BYU-Idaho is quite fundamentalist compared to the average in an already fundamentalist environment. But what he's talking about there are really vague, fluffy philosophical issues. And he was trying to frame it as this idea of oppositional things. The larger point he made was, the scriptures say there's always going to be opposition so that we can have choices. Will you believe in God or not? And it's all these vague existential things. Was Joseph Smith just wise philosophers, or were they really who they claimed to be? And that is not the reason people are leaving the church. I mean, they eventually get there after deconstructing Mormonism. They start to ask the much bigger questions. The reasons they've got questions, as he should well know, is the hot mess of 126 years of racist segregation, polygamy, money stolen and hoarded in Ensign Peak and then managed illegally, endemic child abuse, Joseph Smith marrying other faithful people's wives and their teenage daughters. These are the questions, these are the issues. That's the opposition that he has to engage with. And all they've got to offer is the straw man argument. Well, we'll just pretend that none of that is a thing. It's only about whether you really believe or not. And oh dear, there's this secularization happening in America. So it's natural that young people are leaving religion. It's not just us, which is an excuse they keep using. And they're completely ignoring the herd of massive elephants in the room. And his job is meant to be to deal with that. But because he's a lawyer, he's paid no attention to this all his life. He has been busy doing a law practice. It's taken us and other podcasters and all the people in our audience here pretty much years to debate, discuss, understand what the issues are, process, work out what we think about everything. And if he's going to be speaking competently to this hive mind of post-Mormons or nuanced Mormons who are his problem as he sees it, he needs to know what he's talking about and what we're talking about and what the issues actually are. And he clearly doesn't. And if this is the best they've got to run the entire apologetic and history operation, they are doomed, because
it makes me think about the difference.
The real issues.
Makes me think about the difference between a historian and a lawyer, because both deal with sides of a story, both deal with the collection of facts and investigation. So they have overlapping skills. What is the difference between a historian and a lawyer? I'm going to put it out there, and I could be wrong. And if I am wrong, this is your invitation to go into the chat and tell me, or to add further. But my thought that's come to my head right now is that the difference between historians and lawyers fundamentally is that historians are looking for the truth. Lawyers are looking to argue a side. Lawyers are looking to argue a side depending on who they're defending or who they represent in court. Historians are looking to uncover the objective reality of what happened. And they may have biases of their own, that's different. But I think that's the difference between historians and lawyers. That's my thought, and I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a history degree, so I would completely agree with you.
Okay.
No, the lovely thing about history is, when you examine history, that the facts are always recorded by the victors. So you have to look at all of history with that eye of understanding that what is before you needs to be examined very carefully, because there will be layers of truth, unwitting testimony within the recorded testimony of the victors of the war, the often the men that record the testimony of what life, how wonderful life is. And you're looking for actually the clues as to what real life was like for real people, not just the landed gentry. So it's actually history of history is a subject all in of itself. What he is doing as a lawyer is making the best possible case for his client.
Yes.
Now that is not the job of a historian. He is making the best possible case for his client, and what he's trying to do to the jury, who in this case are paying students at a university, is make the case as to why they should in no way trust the defendant's counsel, who are going to put forward their case. He's trying to completely undermine anybody that they might hear speak after he has spoken. And he did it.
So he's poisoning the well.
Condescending tone and a wagging finger. I just thought, if I were 18-year-old sat in that audience, that straight the way would make me think, what aren't you telling me? Why have you come out tonight to tell me off like I've done something wrong? I'm paying to be here.
Well, should we throw up this clip of him attacking doubt? Because he makes an attack on doubt. So he's laid out this idea that there's compelling reasons to doubt, but doubt itself is bad and you shouldn't do it.
I want to be clear. By acknowledging the existence of reasons to doubt, I am not legitimizing them. And I am certainly not advocating or excusing doubt itself. Jesus said, doubt not. In the face of reasons to doubt, doubt not. And what, did you think Satan would throw up flimsy, easily dismissible reasons to doubt? No, they will be flattering and enticing. If the prince of darkness can transform himself into an angel of light, then surely he can put forth ideas and arguments that appear enlightened.
So anything you hear that may seem compelling, that is just Satan, because Satan somehow can morph himself into the positive feelings that we're also asking you to associate with the truth. So that makes God's way of conferring truth through the Holy Ghost to his children very, very rickety, because if Satan can impersonate the Holy Ghost, what are you meant to do? Ruth, I can see, or no, Jane, you look angry and I want to unleash it.
Oh, we're there. We're at that moment. Not a problem. Okay, so throwing Satan under the bus again. You know what? Satan's fine with the bad press. He can handle it. He's been getting it for all this time.
He's big, bad, and ugly enough, right?
He can deal. The he has had to do no work, because even in this scenario, if Satan himself is sitting back with his furry slippers on and doing bugger all, the church is now doing it for Satan. That's what's happening here. So I get really, really annoyed at the fact that Ruth, you're talking about lawyers. I don't mind if a lawyer wants to create an argument and it's the best possible argument for the church. That's fine. What I don't expect is for you to actively knowingly twist and to obfuscate and to tell me things that are not true. The problem that I have is that if truth is what I am here for, this is what I signed up for, sometimes it is going to be uncomfortable and it might hurt, and I might have to wrestle with all of these things and decide, you know what, maybe that truth is not helpful for me. Maybe I can let that go, and can I still stand in this place? A mature, rational faith where everything that makes me uncomfortable doesn't get chalked down to Satan. How many people in that audience are going to be able to take these questions where they are, this is the age group when grooming for polygamous wives is rife. That's your marriage pool right there. There's all sorts of vulnerabilities in a younger age group. You're making all of these huge life decisions. To not allow someone who's in a questioning phase of their life to feel like they can do that, or it's Satan. Again, how dare you?
Mm-hmm. Ruth?
I find it quite intriguing that Satan's become a thing again. That seemed to drop off the radar for a good 20 years of being a Mormon. Satan got played down. Suddenly, Satan's back out in the open. And we're suddenly, as a church, we know exactly what Satan's doing. We're talking for Satan. We're telling the audience what to expect from Satan. It's almost as if they talk more about Satan than they do about Jesus Christ in this talk. And what I would like to say to these poor students is, are you in the bad place? Because all of the playbook for Satan seems to be describing the corporation that you're part of. Yeah. All of his playbook, pretending to be an agent of light, pretending to have information, pretending to be the conduit between you and a spiritual force.
Expecting obedience.
Expected obedience, blind, unquestioning trust. Do not question the power. The glory going to men. It sounds
Even
exactly like the Satan that I was taught about in the 1980s, and now suddenly the church is falling straight into that. And the truths that I was taught, the church itself are now saying are not true. So why the hell am I believing anything that comes out of your mouth anymore? Because you're not even saying sorry for lying to us. You're just going to hide the fact that you ever taught those things as true and gaslight this next generation into not trusting as older guys who are saying that's not what it was. That's not what we were taught.
Peter?
Well, and that's what Haney in General Conference was saying, that never mind what the old people used to say. It's all about the here and the now. So if this is ultimately a massively anti-thoughts, anti-intellectual thought-stopping kind of message, if you can't tell the difference between Satan and God, he's literally given up. He doesn't tell us how to tell the difference. He just says Satan can sound really reasonable and inspiring and convincing and true and appear light. Well, how then do we know that you're not Satan? Mm-hmm. How do we know that the first presidency are not Satan? Because you've just described what you think they are. And he doesn't offer any differentiation, but they do offer the solution. The solution is stop caring. The solution is stop thinking about it. Stop worrying. They're basically saying to everyone, you cannot trust anything. All the sources of information out there are dodgy. So the act of doubt is forbidden, which is insane. I mean, they don't even know what the word means. Therefore, your only hope is to just double down on totally trusting this church and its leaders. We will tell you what to think. We will tell you what to do. We will keep changing our minds, but that's okay, because you don't need to care what was in the scriptures. Those old prophets, they don't age well, as Haney said in General Conference. It's all about the immediate now. And that is the ultimate final step of creating Lucifer's religion. Unquestioning, unconditional obedience to the now. Whatever the commandment is, it doesn't matter. You're not allowed to think for yourself. There's no point thinking for yourself. You're just here to be drones doing exactly what we tell you to. And that's how you'll be saved, which was, in Mormon theology, the offer that Lucifer made to everyone. And I'm, as many people in the comments have said, I'm just astonished that they're literally teaching this. And it's not just one or two, it's the whole program now from all of them, over and over again over the last few years. And then people our age are like, hang on, what have you done to the religion? What was the point of going to the temple and being warned that this is Lucifer's plan, and now you're telling us to do it? It's so odd, it's so disconnected, but it is, my only conclusion is Lucifer's playing a blinder. If I'm religious and believe Mormonism, well, he's taken over, the lunatic's taken over the asylum. His agents are now sitting in the velvet thrones because they're teaching his religion, and they're trying to train these young people to think the same way, to just leave their brain in a bucket and never ask.
Is anyone here surprised that Peter Bleakley got excommunicated for saying stuff like that? Jane wants to just add something in.
I just want to really quickly ask. So,
what's happening?
Or re-emphasize what he said. So Jesus said, "Don't doubt." That's it. That's the point of Jesus' ministry, is don't doubt. Did I miss that? I mean, explain to me what I signed up for, because it wasn't that.
Yeah.
Jesus was all about questioning the leaders, questioning power systems, telling people to think in the moment always about what they're doing. The whole idea of the Holy Spirit is that in every situation, what the right thing to do will be different to the other situations. And by channeling his values and prioritizing the outcast and compassion and humility, you will know what to do, and the Spirit will help tell you what to do in that given moment. That's the whole point of the step up from Judaism, the step up, as it was, from Phariseeism, where the leaders tell you what to think and do and keep adding more rules and killing the Spirit. So he was all about questioning these things. He was all about skepticism about the status quo. He led a revolution. And these guys are now being the baddies, and they don't see it. They're being the Sanhedrin. They're being the people who crucified Jesus. They're being, in Mormon theology, the people teaching literally Lucifer's religion. And we've watched him do this in this talk.
Well, Peter, you like many people,
it raises so many questions.
You've probably ruined someone's testimony, Peter, and that's what he now goes on to say.
Oh dear.
You did it.
Brace yourself.
Yeah.
It is possible, even likely, that you have said or done something that has become someone else's reason to doubt.
And that is the beginning of blaming the audience. And from then on, he is going to continue to blame the audience, to blame these poor young students. And he's going to keep using the tu quoque argument of saying, well, you as well. Would you have done better than Joseph Smith? He'll go on to say, if Jesus let you run his church, would you do a better job? Again, none of that is relevant. None of that is relevant to criticisms of current church leaders. It doesn't matter. I wouldn't do a better job. But the fact I can be honest about that...
Though.
You would do a better job.
I wouldn't.
Yes, I would. I'm too money orientated and corruptible.
But here's the thing. He's talking to a room full of, and I'm sorry to talk down, but I'm getting old. He's talking to a room full of children. He's talking to people's children, and they're paying to go to that school for an education, not to be lectured about something so silly. Would he feel comfortable saying that exact same sentence and wagging his finger at the Quorum of the 70? I don't think he would. Nope. But that would be more relevant, because they are people who have actually caused people's testimony to fail, because they feel let down. They feel let down by the leadership of this church. They feel that the leadership of the church say one thing out of one side of their mouth and their actions tell a different story altogether. So if he wants to wag his finger at a bunch of children and say these things, I hope he takes it back and actually says it to the leadership of the church. I don't think he does. And I
As-
don't think that this is a universal truth for everybody. They think it's just a top-down talk. It's not this is a message that needs to go to all.
Yeah, there's never an element of self-reflection. And as one commenter on my Facebook page loves to say to me, when you point one finger, four are pointing back at yourself. And I think in this case, it's kind of spot on, because they need to self-reflect that when I say to my state president it's apples and oranges because he likes to compare local leaders to senior church leaders, it's just that someone in the audience may well have said something that causes someone to doubt. But when they teach Satan's plan over the pulpit, they give many people reason to doubt, and many people leave because they see it, because they see that this is not what Christ taught. This church is not being Christian. So then they go, right, well, I'm out. So actually, they do need to self-reflect. You're absolutely spot on, Ruth. They need to look at themselves.
My biggest fear is, and my biggest no, it's not my biggest, but one of my biggest heartaches is that I cause people to believe. I cause people to stay in. I help children to gain a testimony through the primary lessons that I taught. And I taught them incorrect information because I didn't have the gospel topic essays, and I was teaching out of the manuals that the church provided to me. So I think actually that's where my pain lies. Not that I didn't give people a testimony, but that I did. But I gave them a testimony of things that the church itself is now saying are not true.
That's the problem, Jane.
This is where I break down with the fury of this, because I feel like it's what you're saying. Yeah, of course they can self-reflect, but the talk wasn't for them to self-reflect. The fault was to tell us that we are usually the problem. It's this audience, it's this podcast, it's social media, it's whoever. Here's the thing: when he's asking, were we the problem? Did I cause Jane Christie cause someone to doubt? Am I this is the motto in that my home, because usually I am. Yes, I own it. Here's the thing. No, because I have spent my life in this space helping people to feel safe in staying, helping people to figure it out, not promising that everything's going to be okay, but that if they decide to stay or to leave, that they are going to be okay. I spend time working with myself in this space, and it is exciting and vibrant, and I have never heard it, it's something turned around like that, because we talk about the problems, because we acknowledge that they exist, because we listened and we heard. I am absolutely furious at the idea then that Ruth has to take that pain of, well, I did actually the exact opposite of what you're saying. You guys are not doing your job. And that's why we've had to do a podcast. That's why you have to start fact checking, and why we have to start informing, so that we really know what truth is and how to find it. And it's not okay, because you should have been doing this damn thing all along. Today was the first time in my entire life that I told anyone that they shouldn't go to church. I told my kid, I don't think it's safe for you to go to church today. You're a transgender child who is reeling from the death of their best friend. We lost another transgender child to suicide a few weeks ago, last weekend. Another kid. And we're hearing all of this stuff about the possibility of POX 2.0. And I have to sit there and tell them, I don't think you will be safe today. The first time in my life. And you make people's problems about the safe space, the safest space they can possibly be. You know what? Screw you, Kyle. Screw you.
Yeah. I don't know what else to add to that, Jane. I think we should move to the next clip. Right. He's going to talk about how prophets won't lead us astray, and he's going to try and say that we've misinterpreted that and got it wrong.
We sometimes have an unrealistic expectation that God must somehow search out or raise up errorless people to do his work and lead his church.
No, we don't. Straw man.
You're familiar with a statement made in 1890 by Wilford Woodruff. He said, quote, The Lord will never permit me or any other man who stands as president of this church to lead you astray. If I were to attempt that, the Lord would remove me out of my place." Close quote. What does that statement mean to you? Unfortunately, some have interpreted or distorted it to mean that the Lord will never allow church leaders to make a mistake. That is simply not the case. It has never been the case.
That is never been the case. No one has ever been saying that. Well, some people may have been saying that, but we certainly haven't been. What we've been saying is when they make major errors while speaking for God, when they enact an exclusionary policy for so many years that then turns out to not need to have been necessary, when they claim revelation from God for the 2015 exclusionary policy and then reverse it 3 years later, how is that not leading us astray? When they lie and hide $32 billion of sacred money and get settled with the SEC for $5 million, how is that not leading the church astray? They do these major things. They're not just mistakes. They can be human, they can be flawed, they can be fallible, but when they claim to speak directly for a deity, when they're speaking in his name, they shouldn't be getting stuff wrong. I don't have the clip to hand, but you all know it. I've done a video on it. Russ M. Nelson sat in front of a bunch of primary kids saying, "Do you know what a prophet is? Do you know what being a prophet means? It means he speaks for God. For God. So he will never lead you astray. I'll never lead you astray."
He goes on to qualify
and
that
he quoted
say,
this
"He
quote.
wouldn't let me. Let me lead you astray."
He quoted this. Some have said
the same quote.
Yeah. I believe he said, some have said if the prophet leads people astray, then then God will take him away.
He removed.
So
he said that, and President Nelson has literally taught this to us, and here Kyle is getting up, who's an ignorant fool clearly, who hasn't paid any attention to what his own first presidency had been saying. And he says, "I don't know where you got this idea from. It's ludicrous."
Someone needs to splice that TikTok, don't they? Someone needs
don't worry.
I mean, seriously.
We're on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's so stupid. But also, in a sense, not stupid, because what Kyle is representing is not just his own ignorance, which is epic, clearly, but the fact that they are running two narratives at once all the time, and they will. You see it in our own wards. So this is endemic throughout the church. They've been taught two apologetic ways to go. One is you can't criticize the leaders because they're infallible and perfect. They'll never lead the church astray. And if you even think or speak of their human weaknesses, as President Eyring taught, it's a sin you must repent of. Because there's been quotes again recently in conference and so on about how the Lord has carefully prepared through a long lifetime these men. So they almost are perfect. They've literally taught this. And they're always quoting this scripture that they will not be allowed to lead the church astray, including President Nelson. So, and then you get these plonkers get up and say, "I don't know where you got this idea from.
I don't know how you misinterpreted this," which we've been teaching it to you and teaching this interpretation of it to you.
I mean, it's like Ballard complaining that he doesn't know where we got the idea that you should baptize people quickly and challenge them to a baptism date on the second discussion. It was you,
He oversaw the production of Preach My Gospel.
It's actually
so there's no joined up thinking going on.
It is laughable.
Yeah. But then it's the big get out clause is, well, of course we don't expect. It happens to me regularly. Oh, haha, the joke. The Catholics believe their Pope is infallible but never treat him that way, and Mormons don't technically believe that their leader's infallible theologically, but we do sort of treat him that way, and it's, well, no, actually you're misrepresenting the doctrine, what all these leaders are teaching, and it's always the get out clause, but never with honesty. As we said right at the beginning, they never actually admit what the sins are. There is no guide, there's no directory to say this is the things they did that are actually wrong, these are the things you taught on your mission that are no longer considered to be true. There's no effort to clean up that mess. If I was trying to think, what could Kyle, as the new church historian, at the point where the church is going to spiral into total collapse on his watch over the next few years, The crash is accelerating already. It's going to be epic. And he's in the pilot seat of the effort with gaslighting the history or somehow fixing that mess. What could he do? And I just thought what he would have to do, and he could, because they've got the money and the resources to do it, is just have a complete sort of purge of the history. Just provide a resource online. This belief that you have, that the church taught you in whatever era you're in, because they're all different, this is what is official doctrine, this is what isn't. And get your head around that. And they were meant to do that by teaching everyone the gospel topics essays. That process was meant to have started 10 years ago. And Ballard initially pleaded with all the teachers to know the gospel topics essays like the back of their hand. But the other faction that was steadily taking over the church panicked and has made sure it's never appeared in any of the church magazines. And that people are backing away from it. And now Oakes is directly contradicting the race and the priesthood essay. So
control yourself.
Oh, did he touch a book?
I did. I just got a book out. So The Way to Perfection has been mentioned in the comments, and I just want to point that book out. It's a great read if you want to get some answers to those sorts of things. And then I'm going to wait until the next video's up so I can put it back.
Elliot Woodland in the comments and I haven't got Peter's power to share the comments.
All right, let me find it.
He makes a really good point about abusive relationships. So Darvo, they deny, then they attack, and then they reverse the victim and offender. And that's the church's absolute blueprint. And I think it's the church historian's absolute blueprint for how to make the narrative that they're selling to their believing members, sort of hold sway, which is we're the persecuted. We, the people with all the money, all the power, all the control of the narrative, all the control of the resources that you will use, we're the victims somehow. We're the ones that are being persecuted somehow. It's just absolute textbook. But when you are part of that group and you are sitting there and you're a paid up member, you're a captive audience at the university that you've paid for, and if you are partway through your degree and you choose to walk away from the church, you're going to lose all of your credits. You are absolutely in that hive mind. You've got to stay. And I know from Exmo Reddit how many kids there are at university who are desperately trying to just see out their time at that university, at one of the BYU campuses or another, to try and get through and come away with some semblance of an education, despite this sort of shenanigans that's going on. But yeah, it's that whole, they're trying to just make it be that the abuser is actually the victim. I'm sorry, it doesn't fly with us. We've seen it too many times, and we know how to recognize this abusive relationship that you've got going on.
And one of the ways they manifest it, and I'm going to throw this clip up, is that they use the tu quoque argument again to say, could you have done better than Joseph Smith? Stop judging him. There's one thing he says in here that really upsets me, and I'll point it out when we show it.
And finally, there's Joseph Smith, mistake-prone at times, just like the ancients. But God called and magnified him in the greatest restoration of truth ever. And what about you? If the truthfulness of this church, or the truthfulness of your beliefs, were judged by your errors, would anyone ever believe what you believe? Would there have been fewer mistakes, fewer messes if God had only restored his church and gospel through you?
Now, I'm sorry, to call Joseph Smith mistake-prone at times, just a gross understatement, but also to say, well, what about you, huh? Could you have done any better? Could you have done better? They're university students, and that is not the metric by which the truthfulness of the church is being judged. No. It's irrelevant.
And if I'm honest, yes, I bloody well can have done better. I've not gone off getting off with other people's husbands, wives. I've not started my own currency and robbed people blind. I've not lied about things and stolen people's literal farms.
Yeah, but would you have said no to the angel with a flaming sword telling you to take extra husbands, Ruth? That is the question.
Yes, I would. Yes,
Right.
I would.
Vote for Ruth. Vote for Ruth, everyone.
What can I say?
She'd have snapped that sword in half.
Oh,
Because the other side of that, though, Ruth, that, as well as the fact that you, as a woman, you wouldn't have the same opportunities to misuse, that gendered imbalance of power that Joseph Smith ends up wielding. You also, though, are accountable before church authorities. If you did what any of our church leaders did, including Joseph Smith, you would be subject to church disciplinary proceedings, and also no one would be hiding you from the legal consequences of that, because you would be on your own. The world would be talking about it. We talk about cult leaders in very negative terms. Joseph Smith fits those boxes. So yes, I think we can safely say that we don't chalk that kind of behavior up to a few mistakes. Help people recognize what it is they have to avoid. What does Satan look like, even if it means we have to talk about the truthfulness of what was going on with Joseph Smith.
Yeah, I just want to, before we jump into you, Peter, just want to say that there is two parts to this, just to reaffirm that one, when you're looking at this from logical fallacies perspective or just from good argument perspective, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant when you're examining the truthfulness of an organization. To challenge the observer or the questioner if they could do better is irrelevant, because that's not what's being judged. That's not what's at issue. And then second is, yes, most people probably would do better, because most people haven't done what Joseph Smith did. And it wasn't mistakes, because some of the things he did, he claimed God told him to do. It's like people try and say the SEC fines were a mistake. Oh, well, no, they intentionally created 13 shell companies to hide $32 billion. We need to stop calling things we don't like mistakes, and then things that we do like inspired of God. If these men are receiving revelation from God about all sorts of things, Joseph Smith particularly was receiving revelation on the size of shares in the Nauvoo Mansion House. Shameless plug there for my show that I do with John Delin and Mike from LDS Discussions. We go over that. But yes, if they're receiving revelations for those tiny, minute intricacies of life, then if it's a miracle, according to one of the apostles, that the domain name became available, churchjesuschrist.org, so that then the church could do its rebranding. If God is involved in those minute details, then we can't call the things Joseph Smith did mistakes. Peter, take us home.
Hey.
Well, not home. We've got a few more clips. But
forget Joseph Smith. It's the current people. The current leaders are doing this. They're being fined for financial corruption and law breaking. They are teaching the wrong religion. It's the here, it's the now. And as the Pharisees, and I would say, I'll just call it the people who are clearly running with Lucifer's religion, because we've very
Satanists
established what that looks like. The Satanists.
Can I go on the record, Pete? Can I join you in calling them Satanists? They are Satanists.
Have more morals, to be honest. I've seen the Church of Satan's guidelines.
Yeah. Sorry to malign the upstanding and kind people that are members of the Church of Satan. Wow. Apologies, Peter.
But it is wolves in sheep's clothing, and I know you say that on very specific definition. It's not a slander. It's not you run around sacrificing goats and doing blood orgies. That's all nonsense. In Mormon religion, Satanism as a religion, as a concept, is taking away people's free agency to think for themselves, deceiving them. He's the father of lies, and you tell people that you will make them good. You force people to be good by taking away their freedom, and you tell them what to do instead of training them to become gods. It's the ultimate way of sabotaging someone fulfilling their potential.
So in that respect, they are acting like Satan. They are following Satan's plan. Satanists in that respect. Okay.
Yeah.
So
what happens to where much is given, much is required? This is another of these Mormon shibboleths. They absolutely take a flamethrower to when they offer these as the excuse for leaders getting things wrong. While never, as someone said in the comments, they never actually admit what the wrong things were. It's all kept very vague. This is meant to be a blanket solution. They don't want anyone to hear from them what the problems are. Therefore, who's meant to judge? We must be allowed to think for ourselves, to filter. If we're being expected to filter the past that, oh, he made mistakes, but hang on to the good stuff, well, how are we judging which is which then? Because you haven't educated the people of several generations in my ward which is which, and they all disagree, and they mostly disagree with me. But you've not clarified it either way, and I think I'm more up to date with church doctrine than they are. So it just creates conflict and mess. If much is given, where much is given, much is required. The leaders of the church, the mouthpieces of God, should be absolutely the peak people on earth. They should be what Sherry Jew keeps saying they are. They should be the most prepared, spiritual, almost perfect guides we could ever have, who can see round the corners, who have the superhuman powers. They should never make mistakes. They should see future problems coming and nip them in the bud, not sit there waiting to be fleeced of all their money because they won't deal with child abuse. They clearly can't see ahead. And why are we making these massive excuses for them? They're meant to be better than us. Therefore, the only way to get rid of them is to vote opposed, as we're finding. If they have to be held accountable for if they admit these things are bad that previous prophets did. If they're doing it now, but they're not allowing anyone to even think for themselves about which it is. And the answer is always, don't care. Just stop caring. Don't care what was right or wrong. Just be loyal to this church because we've got priesthood and we've got a living prophet. And it's an entirely circular argument.
I'm going to use that as a segue. Okay. Right.
Don't question this religion because it's already true. Just
Don't
believe
study
that. There's
errors.
no reason to. No evidence. And don't look at the alternate points of view.
So what do we do with error?
Yeah, what do we do with error?
You can't hide or hide from the humanness of humans, but it is equally unproductive to seek out error and wallow in it by making it an emphasis of study. You will never come to know and understand the truths of God by studying the errors of man. Nor has God appointed you or me or anyone to be an ongoing arbiter of error in his leaders, scrutinizing every word or act of apostles and prophets to make sure they fit within our current understanding of correctness. That is not his plan. That is not his order.
I feel called out. I don't know about you guys.
No, I don't
Ruth?
actually. I don't, because he's talking about the errors of men.
True. Yeah, and
That's what
as
I
a
said.
woman.
And also, the whole of the Book of Mormon is a history of the errors of men. The whole way through, it's all of the stories, and it ends with the whole destruction of the entire civilization. So if we're not supposed to study the errors of men, should we just get a pile of Book of Mormons and start a little bonfire? What does he want us to do if we're not to study the errors of men? That is all that Scripture is. It's a study of the errors of men and how they have interacted with God and how God has interacted with them. So I find that extremely interesting for a church leader, especially on the back of that most recent talk where we're told to essentially ignore any previous church leader and only trust the current prophet. Because what they're essentially saying is you can get rid of anything that was said in the past, and it's just today's mouthpiece that matters. And that's essentially what he's saying here as well, that don't study the errors of men. Don't look to Scripture, which is the stories of how men have erred and then maybe reconnect with God, but maybe not, maybe destroyed a whole civilization. Don't look at that. Don't worry about it.
If Joseph Smith hadn't looked at the errors of men and wondered about the errors in other religions, would he have knelt and prayed in a grove of trees?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Maybe not. The entire way, as I said earlier, the entire way to deal with improvement, self-improvement, if the natural man is an enemy to God, then you should study the errors made by the natural man so that you don't make them yourself and become perfected. For example, if you want to view it from a Mormon lens, just from a more secular lens, the way we improve, there are no failures, there are only lessons, was something I was taught. So You study your errors and you improve. A wise person studies the errors of other people and improves.
Yeah.
You know, God delights in wisdom. And how do you become wise? By learning, by looking at errors made. Jesus Christ looked at the errors of men and said, You're erring here by trading in the temple. Stop it." Jane?
I think it's part of the way life needs to work. We have to look at some of the problems. I think particularly in this space, because we've arrived here. There are things that we have to discuss. What my faith has looked like. I mean, I can kind of up to a point get behind what he's saying there, because by this point in the talk, I'm focusing on current church leaders. Even if you leave everything in the past that's problematic and just focus on today. We are being expected to study every word of the leaders every week on a Sunday. That's all we get to regurgitate now. We are so familiar with them. But if there is an error there, and there so often is, what do we do with that? What does an error even look like? Like you're saying, Peter, what does that even mean? Can it be that I could be reading something and it causes me pain? Does that count? What if those are the types of questions that I have? Because I feel like most people, when they arrive in a space where they have questions, often it's relating to trust or misinformation, something that is causing us to feel really, really uncomfortable. And we need that answer. This isn't about, as much as we love you, Nemo, and what your work is so valuable, we're not all walking around fact checking.
What do you mean?
We have to come really quite far to find you in this space, and overwhelmingly people are finding it helpful because we're not being told what we can do with this. So if you want us to study the Word of God, if you want us to study the Word of the prophets, it's going to have to come with how people are going to experience those words.
Mm-hmm. Peter?
I'm trying to understand sort of what he thinks he's saying here. And there are lots of people, all these silly talks about doubting your doubts and all of that sort of thing. I think it comes from just a massive arrogance and pride. They think they've got this perfect thing going on, and that the only scenario in which people would look at things on balance and conclude it's bad and leave is if they're not looking at all the evidence. This is why President Nelson says, "Don't be a lazy learner. Study your way into a testimony," which is hysterical. The nuanced and post-Mormon community just fell about laughing when he said that, because it's because we do that we lose that trust, because we actually find out everything they've been hiding. And if he is so naive that he thinks that's the answer, and this segues for something this guy's going to say later, and then Dallin Oaks said to young marrieds in Chicago who were dealing with lots of parts, testimony, family relationships, and people losing their faith over church history. He specifically addressed it and said he doesn't think research is the answer. And again, we're going to hear things in this talk that kind of mirror that. So Carl has been paying attention to his line managers. This talk is a series of semi-quotes from Nelson, from Oaks, from a lot of different people trying to replay their stupidest things, in our opinion, but what he thinks are the big answers. But it all comes from this idea that they think if you just look at everything in a balanced way, on balance, you'll see that these guys were pretty amazing. They did good stuff. It's only if you intentionally just focus on the bad stuff and ignore the good that you would actually lose your faith. And that's his massive miscalculation, and the miscalculation of all of them, because the evidence of corruption is so overwhelming. It's a huge percentage of what these people did. And my view is the only way they can actually salvage this from a faithful perspective is a massive amount of segueing to absolutely, we're going to learn from these people's mistakes. turn that negative into a positive, and they're too stupid to realize that's the only way. This is the only way they can detoxify
And
this.
so I think
It's to
that's
say,
why
we're all in it together. It's purely Mormon. We're here to learn and progress. We're on earth to make mistakes. These people made these mistakes. Let's love them because they're like us. We all make mistakes, but let's learn from their error and not repeat it. What they're doing is ignore their error because you make mistakes, not learn from it.
And in fact,
Therefore, they keep repeating.
feel
Yeah.
guilt and shame for even judging them for having made mistakes. Well,
Yeah.
I wasn't judging them
Yes.
for having made a
Yeah.
mistake. I'm very empathetic for people making mistakes, but I am going to hold them accountable for the mistakes that they've made, because apparently we believe in being accountable for our actions, and that's part of this journey through life. So let's see you modeling how to be accountable for your actions, church leaders. That would be a massive improvement. We will absolutely allow you to make mistakes. We expect it, and we tolerate it. We do not tolerate not being held accountable.
absolutely. And so that's why I think he's now saying he's forced into this position, and this can be our final clip, where and is the most important clip of the whole talk. Oh, go on, Peter.
Just one thing, just there's dog whistle language being dropped in here. There's about 3 times he mentioned correctness. He talks about one of his big messages in this talk is there is no change to the laws of the gospel. It doesn't change, and people find it difficult. And he says you can't really understand God, which is weird for Mormons to say that, because we're all about how we're the same species and he's like us, and has the same sort of values and worldview. But he used the word correctness there, as we change with the world, and he means political correctness. It's all about the LGBTQ stuff. And there are several little words that he uses very carefully as the dog whistles to the bigots, that he's talking about the liberals. He's talking about the social progressives. He's talking about the people who want to be inclusive of LGBTQ people. So I just wanted to mention that, as usual, that is, of course, a major thread throughout this thing.
Yeah, because I think that's the only way you can get a talk approved these days, is to have that content. Because you've got to impress the man who will next become president of the church, which is Dallin H. Oaks, and that is his shtick. He's really doesn't like that community. So what do you do then? There's this problem. We have questions. It's okay to have doubts, I suppose, or there are reasons. No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying that there are compelling doubts out there. And so you're going to want to try and answer them, try and deal with them. You're going to want to look at the evidence. But instead, this is what he has for us.
I hope you realize that having perplexing questions that arise from reasons to doubt is not a problem.
Thank you.
But please understand, finding answers to these perplexing questions ultimately is not the solution. The solution is a sure and certain foundation whereon, if you build, you cannot fall. That foundation is Jesus Christ and his gospel, the fullness of which is found and taught here in his church.
Not really, is it? Because this is the thing that I would take away from this, is that if he's going to use that Jesus Christ is a sure foundation upon which if men build, they cannot fall, fine. So let's look at how Christian the church is. Let's look at how much the actions of prophets and apostles, and this will be in upcoming videos, keep your eye out for it, how much do the actions of prophets and apostles really reflect the actions and teachings of Jesus Christ? Would Jesus Christ have hoarded hundreds of billions of dollars instead of helping the sick and the needy? Would Jesus Christ have adopted, in answer to that hoarding of wealth, well, they need to learn to pull themselves up by their bootstraps type attitude? If we just give them money, how can they learn to help themselves in the good old American way? Jesus Christ was not a white conservative American, but yet that seems to be who he's morphed into these days. And that's weird. And so they can say they're Christ-like because he's become this weird conservative, like socially conservative, not politically conservative, socially conservative American guy. who it's
Politically
all
as well.
about
Politically as well.
earning as much money as you can. It's so bizarre. But I want to go back to finding answers to those questions is not the solution. Can we actually stop and pause on that? Because I went on a bit of a rant about
He's a
conservative
lawyer,
Jesus.
for crying out loud. He's a lawyer, and he's saying
Come on, Ruth.
finding answers to questions is not the solution. Crikey, if you're
not the answer
reading-
to the
if
question.
you need a lawyer, please don't go to this guy. He's not your guy.
Oh goodness.
What an
Like,
idiot!
it's
Honestly.
bonkers.
Oh, someone's saying in the
I
comments.
think-
Sorry, just before you go, Peter. Someone's saying in the comments. McKay used to be my state president. He really is a good person. I don't doubt it. Means well, fair enough, and he's actually quite liberal in many of his attitudes. That's not coming across here, Trevor, but I believe you.
No.
Very much under the thrall of the church, and that's what will do it. Isn't it? We see this pattern time and time again. We see these men, and then someone comes out and says, "Oh, I knew them. They were great," because they were great when they were concerned with the actual Christian thing of dealing with the individual. But once they started to progress in the organization, it became less about being like Christ and more about playing the game. And when you start to play the game, that's when you lose that Christianity, and you start to just, well, if I quote this person enough, then I might get this far. If I quote this person enough, get to this position, then as long as I don't die, I can become quite significant in this church. They start to get corrupted, because we have learnt by sad experience that it is the nature and disposition of almost all men, as soon as they get a little power, as they suppose, that they will begin to exercise unrighteous dominion. And that is what we see time and time again, that quote from Doctrine and Covenants enacted in the leaders of the church, who were, I'm sure, and probably still are, lovely people, but their actions are not portraying the sort of liberalness and kindness that a lot of people are talking about in the chat. Jane, please disagree with me if you do.
How did you know?
I could see it on your face.
See everything. It's all right here, people. Was it Trevor? See, I believe that that I don't think people are so willingly going into it to kind of throw everything under the bus just in order to progress. I don't actually think that was what you were saying anyway. No. I reckon that for the most part, and I'm going to imagine Kyle is probably the same. You know, you were friends with RFM. We're hearing good reviews from people who are in your ward. We have the best stake presidents. We have the best bishops. You know, the Brit Avengers have really, in so many ways, won bishop roulette. But I come back home from church, and my favorite people in the world are saying the most problematic things, and I would love to, dissect them and dive into them, but we can't do that in that space because it's either not appropriate to do it or we don't have the power. I think part of the problem is things are very well received, and so you get a platform when you say the right things. I think in a lot of ways they're absolutely believed. I think they're not doing the work that they need to in this space to understand why people really leave, and that's the messaging that keeps coming over and over again. I don't think it's as much to do with you don't know Mormon history. I think that's part of it. But I think it's very little in the scheme of what is actually causing pain and how can you reconcile that. And then when you figured out how you're going to reconcile that, throw it in the bin because you're already here. What is it that most people are hearing that takes them away? Because you do not have all the answers, because all of the people who have left thought exactly the same thing, followed the same patterns, did all the thought stopping, all of those things. My difficulty is, and it's probably like, my closing thought is if I am going to actively engage in staying in this space, and it is bloody hard work to do it, do not ask me to be blind to untruths. Do not ask me to stay here blindly. One thing I have learned from the collaboration work that you've been doing recently with your colleagues, Nemo, is if I give grace to, would I say this about any other church? Could you be a member of any other church and play that? And what are you going to think? Am I going to give Scientology a pass because, it's the faults of men? Of course not. So can we be rational? Maybe part of it is giving each other the grace to be human. So, Kyle is probably a fantastic guy, but oh my goodness, sort yourself out, buddy, because you are not helping.
Peter and then Ruth
Yeah.
for final thoughts and
Yeah, I
your
think-
thoughts on finding answers to questions is not the solution.
Well, that's insane, isn't it? And why is he implying that having great faith and basing your life on Jesus is incompatible with finding answers to questions? He's said, as he said earlier, he's making these ridiculous binaries. Well, it should be both. I am the truth and the light. I am the answer. I
The
am
truth
the
shall
way.
set you free.
The truth will set you free, or everything Joseph Smith said about you can't be saved without knowledge. I mean, it's a joke. I'm trying to what I think one of the most profound things I ever heard was Paul Toscano, who's one of the September 6th, did a sort of Facebook rant a few years ago, and he was pointing to the education of the general authorities, and this is something that Hugh Nibley foreshadowed in 1980 in his Managers
Leaders
and
and
Leaders
Managers,
talk. Yeah, leaders and managers, just saying that nearly all of these people who do business or law as they study, which is specifically what Hugh Nibley warned, that the church should be taken over by business graduates and lawyers. And most of the recent church historians since Leonard Arrington have been lawyers by profession and training. They don't have a liberal arts education, Paul said. They don't get it. They haven't a clue what literature is. They don't understand history. They don't understand documents. They don't understand philosophy. They don't understand theology. And this is the stuff of religion. So you have the least capable, the least trained, the least able people to run religion, and certainly to deal with history and context and culture, running a religion. And it's a complete disaster, and it's falling off a cliff. So the fact that this is why they go native when they enter the corporate machine at Salt Lake. They've got no experience or practice in having big ideas of their own. They don't understand that dissent and creativity and thinking of alternatives is essential to being a great leader. They're just yes men, and it doesn't even occur to them that they're missing something, because no one has ever trained them to know what they're missing, to have that empathy, that understanding of the human condition. And I thought that was a brilliant point that Paul made. And this is why so fast they go from seeming like nice, reasonable guys to just saying the most ridiculous propaganda nonsense. And all he's doing here is channeling the other general authorities. There's not a single original idea here. This is just a manifestation of the ethos of the current leadership. And the second thing I'd say is, notice the language, and you're seeing this over and over again in their propaganda to the teenagers. Confusion. Everything's confusing. You go on online, it's so confusing. Who knows who to trust? I don't understand. I need the anchor of the living mouthpiece of God. And the apostles keep selling that idea. There is nothing confusing here. The reason people are having faith crisis is because of extremely obvious, simple, clear things. If someone is stealing, that's not confusing. They're committing a crime. They're robbing you. If someone is lying to you, you're not confused about that. In fact, you've had a moment of clarity. You've fact-checked and you found out this general authority is a liar. If someone has facilitated child abuse, there's nothing confusing or vague about that. It's not floating around in this fog of unknowing and who can ever know we need a prophet right now. It's, you are assertively opposing any laws that would improve child protection wherever you can. And when you actually got actual cases in front of your face, you will cover up the abuse and perpetuate it. There's nothing confusing about that. It's stark in its clarity. And so, but they want to pretend to train these kids that where they feel their cognitive dissonance between the brainwashing from the church and reality, they're pretending it's confusion, and they're telling them this discomfort you're feeling is unknowing, that you are not able to filter the truth. There are 6 ways to filter everything these leaders say that is purely Mormon kosher. Is it compatible with scripture? Does it make rational sense? Does it feel like it's coming from a place of Christ-like love and compassion? Has it been sustained by the membership as a true doctrine or policy? Is it something being consistently taught by all the leaders and prophets of the church? And whatever number 6 is, have we had a vote? We can think for ourselves. He's telling us we can't make that judgment. We can. And the church itself taught us the tools to use. And it taught us that constantly judging these people is literally what we're on earth for. We're here to judge our own sins and mistakes. We're here to learn from them intensively. That's why we're here in this messy world as imperfect mortal beings. It's a learning process. And these Satanists are saying, stop it. Stop doing Christ's plan of salvation. Stop learning. Stop thinking. Stop learning to make that judgment and gain that wisdom. Just obey us. You can't trust yourself. You can't make that choice yourself. It's not your place to make that choice. You must not even notice or care if we rip you off. And he finishes his talk with a long diatribe on the story of Jane Manning James, who was abused by the church, repeatedly refused.
Right, I'm going to stop you there, Peter, because we talked about that earlier. We talked about that earlier, and I know you've got a long diatribe prepared on that one as well. But sorry, Kid Freshie in the chat, I'm going to have to be the bad guy and silence the wonderful Peter Bleakley, because we have to let Ruth speak. Sorry, Kid Freshie, I see your comment.
Sorry.
Yeah. Very sorry, but he's got his own podcast where he can talk for 6 hours. So go check that out. If you love Peter Bleakley talking non-stop for several hours, then you can go to his YouTube channel and listen to it to your heart's content. Right, Ruth, please.
So I thought it was really interesting, that guy who said in the comments about he was a nice guy, or he is a nice guy, and a little bit facetiously, but you'll know where I'm coming from. Isn't that what everybody who lives on the same street as a serial killer says about them? And he seemed like such a nice guy. They always pulled the bins out for me if I was on holiday, or they always brought.
Can I be really clear? We're not calling Kyle McKay a serial killer.
I'm not calling him a serial killer.
Thank you.
What I am saying is, being a nice guy is not a metric of being a spokesperson for God and knowing how you should best live your life. That is not the best way of judging something. And also, his actions of yesteryear does not speak to his actions of today and his motivations of today, unfortunately. And I think when you're in the pay of an organisation as large and as wealthy as the church is, I can understand how, for the sake of your job, your pension, your kudos within that community, you may find yourself doing things that in former years you would not have done. You wouldn't have done because your integrity would have told you not to, and maybe he's let his integrity go somewhat, and that's a shame. I know, as a convert to the church, that one of the biggest selling points for me was the feeling that the church proves itself by its fruits, by its actions, that there are good people here doing good things for other people. And I remember the missionaries pointing out to me that scripture in Moroni where it said, where they said to me, don't trust our testimony. We're just little old Americans come over here to teach you the gospel. Don't trust us. Don't take our word for it. Don't lean on my testimony. Find out for yourself. And here's this guy, the historian of the church, telling these children, no, that's not the way to do it. You just have to trust your leaders. Don't find out for yourself. Don't question. Don't ask questions. Don't interrogate the information that's there. You just take our word for it. That is not the value proposition that we were told as converts back in the day.
But the reason that may have changed is because before, when they were like, ask all the questions you want, find out for yourself, means asking other members and looking at church-approved materials.
Yeah. And I looked at all the church-approved materials. I was a voracious reader back in the day, but it was a limited pool of material that was available to me. Mm-hmm. If only I'd found, bearing in mind I was born in 73, but if only I'd come across that 1970 Friend magazine that could have told me about the Rock in the Hat. Darn it, that must have been the one issue that I overlooked. I just feel that church has missed the opportunity. And I said this to you guys before we went live. If I were going to buy a car and I walked into the showroom and they immediately bombarded me with, right, the thing you're not going to do is go onto Trustpilot and look at our reviews, because only bad people do things like that. And we don't want you talking to those people that just walked out with the keys to a new car. Don't you dare find out about their experience. We don't want you to go and talk to our mechanics. We don't want you to talk to people who've had cars from us 6 months ago or 2 years ago. You just take our word for it that this is good. I would be walking back out the door again. I would not be purchasing a car from that garage. I want this organisation to be good. I want them to prove by their actions that this is a good thing, of value to the world, and that people would join, not because they've had the hard sell, not that because they've been shamed or they're staying out of fear for condemnation, but they're staying because they think it offers really something fantastic. And bonus, a relationship with God. Wouldn't that be amazing? That it's both good here and now to the world in at large, and also that it's a vehicle to get back to a heavenly parent. What a fantastic proposition. But no, this guy is going to stand up and just tell these kids off on their dime and tell them how not to go and find out for themselves, despite what Moroni tells them to do.
All right. Cheers for that. I guess the perks of this being my podcast is I get to have the final word, but I don't really need to have it because my guests have said it all wonderfully. So thank you to them. Thank you to you. If you like this content, make sure you subscribe, you like, and if you really, really like this content, you can always throw out a donation. Thank you to all those that have donated in the chat. The donation link will be in the description box. But until next time, it has been a wonderful pleasure. Thank you very, very much for watching. And stay tuned, because I'm sure we'll point out nonsense like this in the near future. Take care, everyone. Good night. Bye-bye.